Um, I have pretty much hundreds of conversations during these discussions. After these discussions, many of our community members call me. I'm out there in the community. So have hundreds of discussions in a given month on a variety of topics related to aging and longevity. And so what I did when I found out that Bobbi wasn't going to be able to make it was I just wrote down 5 things that come to mind when we're talking about the topic of caregiving. And what I thought I would do is just share those with you, share those thoughts with you. And if you want to jump in with your comments, your questions, your concerns, just either use chat or Q&A, or raise your virtual hand and I'll open up your mic and you can share your insights with everybody. But let's kind of run through these, and if it triggers anything, great. If not, we can all go back to what we were doing before we tuned in. So I guess the number one thing that sort of comes up when I'm talking to individuals who are in the caregiving role, and before we dive into this, the other day I was talking with somebody and they said I was chatting with them and I referred to them as they were an adult child. They were concerned about their mom and dad, and I referred to them as a caregiver. And she said, I'm not a caregiver. And I was like, I'm sorry. Caregiver is this loose term that we in this field use for anybody who's concerned about a loved one. But it's also the same term, and this is where it was confusing for her. It's also the same term that we use for somebody who is caring, you might hire to care for mom and dad. And so I explained this to her and she goes, oh, wow, never really thought of that. But so today, when we're talking about the term caregiver, yes, it can mean somebody that you're paying to care for a loved one. It could be somebody who's volunteering to care for your loved one, but it can also be referred to as us, somebody who's concerned about mom and dad, the next door neighbor, your aunt and uncle, what have you. But I think the most important thing that I see out there is communicate. The most important challenge that I see out there is communication. Is that a lot of times we're guessing what our loved one wants because we haven't had a conversation with them. It hasn't been clearly defined. There could be communications problems between us and the person that we're concerned about. And it generally results in the root of the challenges that we face when we're concerned about a loved one. So that's sort of my number one thing is that it's really knowing what our loved one wants and how do we get that. And one thing that many people walk away from when they go through a caregiving scenario is that they understand how important it is to think about what would happen if my health would change, what would happen if my spouse passed away, what would happen if my spouse is sick, and how would I like to be taken care of and how would they like to be taken care of. So knowing what we want, communicating what we want is probably the number one issue when I'm talking to folks on this topic. Number two, and this is a big number two, is that I would say that at least half of the phone calls that I receive with people asking for advice or guidance are from adult children, and they are having differences in opinion on what we should do with mom and dad, and there's conflict, there's multi-directions of, what are we going to do? And it's sort of this point always goes back to number one, is that oftentimes the reason the siblings are arguing over what we should do with mom and dad is because nobody has a clear picture of what mom and dad want. And or mom may have communicated one thing and it was interpreted by one sibling, and then it was interpreted different by another sibling. Okay, now before I move to number three, I know a bunch of folks have sort of come in a little bit late, and you're wondering why we're not having a conversation with Bobbi Carducci, the author of The Imperfect Caregiver. And it's because Bobbi's got the flu, found out at the last minute there was no way she was going to make it. So I'm just sort of prompting an open discussion on caregiving. And what I'm doing here is just sharing. I just put this together immediately when I found out Bobbi was going to be here, sort of 5 things that I see that the caregivers and the families and the individuals that I'm talking to are dealing with. But I encourage you all, if you want to jump in on this conversation, if you've got questions, if you've got a concern that you sort of jumped in on this conversation today to hear Bobbi talk about, that you were looking for a solution, by all means, throw that question, comment into chat or Q&A, or raise your virtual hand, and we can try to come up with a solution for you. Okay, number 3, stress and guilt. This is one thing that I hear clearly communicated in my calls, in our discussions that we have on this platform related to caregiving, is there's a lot of stress in terms of managing our time, especially sometimes in families where there's one sibling that sort of becomes the dedicated caregiver, and he or she is sort of taking time off work and opening up the checkbook and running around and managing the care for mom and dad, and sort of looking at, geez, I need some help, and it's not there. The guilt could occur from that person that I'm just mentioning who's stressed. There could also be a tremendous amount of guilt and feeling like I'm not taking care of mom the best way that I can. But I know there's an awful lot of guilt from siblings that might not be geographically in an area where they are taking on a role, and then their sibling is the one who's all stressed out and doing it all. And so that's another topic that I find that caregivers are dealing with. Let's see, I'm looking in chat, and Patty Hagen says, ask for help. Try not to get too consumed by the thought of having to provide all the care yourself. It's okay to reach out. And I agree, Patty. Thanks for throwing that in there. I think it's one of the best things about these discussions that we have, or virtual support groups, or live and in-person support groups, is to, number one, recognize you're not the only one out there who's going through this. And number two, recognize that there are people out there that want to help you and can help you. And it's, while there are paid caregivers and paid providers that you can be connected with, there's also a ton of folks out there, and a ton of folks that might be in your parents' network that would love to chip in and take some of the burden off your shoulders and help out. And one of the, on that topic, one of the best discussions that we had not too long ago was with a woman, Glenna Crooks. And Glenna is has developed this platform. I'm going to pull this up and drop it into chat, to help people identify their network of care. Now, ideally, you want to do this for yourself before you're in a caregiving role. But what I've found is that a lot of adult children are doing this with for mom and dad, with mom and dad, and it can help identify extra hands and extra resources that are out there for us when we're going through this caregiving journey. So, okay. So number 4, the one thing that I hear a lot of, not only in my one-on-one conversations with folks, but on these discussions that we have, is the financial pressure of caregiving. Now, this could be the financial pressure of, hey, I've got to take time off. I might have to quit my job, based on the commitment that I'm making to caregiving. But I think one of the scariest things that I've seen out there is where folks begin to sacrifice their own financial well-being and their own future retirement or caregiving funds for a loved one. And what I mean by this is that it could be that mom doesn't have a significant amount of assets and can't necessarily afford a memory care community, and the family chips in and they start writing checks for this. And if you are if you are of a means that this is not going to impact your future, your kids' future, what have you, that's fantastic, and that's great. But I hear a lot of people say, geez, I'm concerned that I'm never going to be able to retire because I'm chipping in for mom's care or what have you. And this is one of these things where when I'm sort of brainstorming with folks about what direction to take, I think it's very important for all of us to draw a line in the sand on what we're willing and able to do for our loved ones in this caregiving role. And it could be financial, it could be time, it could be energy. And if we're not going to be able to make a financial commitment, then helping steer them and doing research on different ways that we can creatively make sure that our loved one is being provided for with the funds that they have available. Okay, I'm kind of babbling there. All right, let's see. Ruby writes in chat here, my husband has MCI. Oh, geez. Okay. I'm drawing a blank on MCI just right now, but I will come back to that. I know how important self-care is for a caregiver. However, he gets angry when I go out with friends. I also bought him a medical alert to wear when I'm not home. I have to give it to him when I leave. How do I handle the anger? Also, when someone says they're willing to help, I've learned I need to tell them the specifics as what I need. Mild cognitive impairment. I apologize, Ruby, and thank you, Jose, for sharing that. Well, number one, Ruby, thank you for throwing your personal caregiving challenge into the mix here, because I hope I can share some thoughts that might help you think creatively about solutions. But more importantly, I hope that other people in the audience today might be willing to jump in and share their ideas and resources for you as well. But let me first off say that the uh, the probably one of the most challenging the most challenging caregiver stories that we hear and that we face are those that have some form of cognitive impairment, whether it be dementia, Alzheimer's, MCI, what have you, because our loved one is has a disability, but it's hard to we can't understand what's going on in their head, and that can be one of the most frustrating things. And the thing that the words and the actions that come out of their mouth are not they're a totally different person than the person that we married, or the person that raised us. And so I think one of the most important things for us all to remember is just that is that this is a disability. It would be so much easier. I hear this all the time. It would be so much easier if my husband had a mobility problem and a disability that way, because I can push the wheelchair down the hall. I can open the door for them. But when we talk about a cognitive impairment, we don't know what's going on in their brain. And one of the things that really helped me understand this a little bit better was if any of you have taken the virtual dementia tour, this is a very artificial exercise that you go through, where they put headphones on, you've got glasses, your vision is blurry, you might have some gloves on that make it difficult to pick things up. It's sort of throwing all of these scenarios into the mix, and then you have to go through a bunch of exercises. But what I realized when I went through that, what opened my eyes up to it, is that when I had all these things on and I started going through the tasks that were instructed to me, my behavior was very odd. That I was rambling. The things that I was saying would not have made sense to an innocent bystander. And it really opened my eyes up to, when we see somebody who is maybe bursting out in anger or talking incoherently, we just don't know what's going on in their head. And I think, Ruby, one of the things is, yes, your husband may get angry when you go out with your friends, and I know you feel guilty doing that, but I think mentally that's probably the best thing that you can do. I also think that your tip is, as you sort of cultivate your network, and let your friends and your husband's connections know that you could use an extra helping hand, to really spell out the specifics of the expectations and creating your wish list of the things that could help you. And I could see where you might have a very good friend that's like, man, I'm just not mentally equipped to jump in and help you there, Ruby, but I'd love to make you some lasagna. And so coming up with that wish list. Let me see, I think some more chats have been coming up here. Let's see, Mike says, in some cases, a disease, a caregiver having their own medical concerns, but reluctant to share with the person they are caring for, creates feelings of guilt if they were to do so. Yeah, Mike, I agree. There's a couple of things here. Is that that yes, as we're, maybe let's say that we're like Ruby and we're taking care of our spouse, and now we have some health concerns that are arising. The ability to go get those diagnosed or to take care of those, because you know, our spouse or our other loved one is, you know, in a much worse state is key. The other thing that we all need to be concerned when we're in a caregiving role is injuring ourselves or putting ourselves out where we can't now take care of our loved one. And who do we have as a backup plan? Do we have a backup plan? And this is something to really think about, especially if, you know, part of your role as a caregiver is transferring or bathing somebody. You know, it's so easy to throw your back out there, and making sure that we have backup and care. Okay. All right. Well, Ruby, I hope my thoughts were helpful, but it sounds like you're doing everything. You're doing everything the way that I would have done it. You're trying to take steps to take care of yourself. You've got a medical alert system in case when you leave there's a fall or something like that. You've reached out to your friends and you're being very specific in what you can do there. I'm sure because you've done enough research to learn about the medical alert systems, I think the adult daycare is a great resource for people that are in your situation. But I also know how difficult it can be to get a loved one to leave the home if they don't want to leave, to go to an adult daycare setting, especially if their cognitive impairment is mild, is because they still have some awareness of, you know, their condition, and they oftentimes may be resistant, especially if at some point in their life they uttered, "Never put me in a place," or "Never take me to a place." The one thing that I would recommend, Ruby, and anybody who's in a situation like this, is that even if your loved one says, I don't want to go anywhere, I want to stay here, it's worthwhile to reach out to the adult daycare centers that are near you, and go in on your own and share your story, or call them up on the phone, or set up a webinar, because they've seen it all, and there's some wonderful creative strategies that I've heard over the years, that where somebody was resistant to move in to participate, and through some creative you know, visiting with a friend. I think one of the best stories that I ever heard with an adult day center was a gentleman went there and you know, told his daughter, "There's no way that I'm gonna go to a program like this." And then she called the center and they talked about it. And this gentleman had cognitive impairment, but what they were able to do was they were able to say to him, you know, "Dad, they were very impressed with what with you when we went to visit that center, and actually they would like to offer you a job." And yes, this, you know, could be deemed somewhat deceptive, but they came up with 5 or 6 things that he could do there that would help them out. Even though he would be a participant, he was going to have a job. And so they said they'd like you to come in for an interview. And so instead of going to the admissions room, or they may have just changed the sign on the admissions room and they said that it was HR, and they, you know, went through this job interview. He got dressed up and all this stuff, and then went home, and he was all excited to see if he was going to get this job. And, you know, he got the job. And so then when he would show up at the adult day center, he was always dressed nicely, and he knew that he needed to go, you know, whatever it was, straighten out the closet or do whatever tasks they had for him. And and then what they would do is they would say, "Well, Mr. Smith, you've completed your job. If you'd like to, play cards or participate in this activity, you're more than welcome. Or, maybe you could help me with this activity. So there's so much creativity that we need to use when we're faced with these challenging situations. Let's see, Ruby says, my husband now attends an MCR group sponsored by Insight Memory Care at their Sterling location. It's a great place for him to attend. The reason he attends is his doctor told him to go. Yeah, and that's one thing. We all know our loved ones. So Ruby, number one, I'm psyched that he's participating, that you connected with Insight Memory Care. For those of you who are in Northern Virginia and you're a caregiver, Insight Memory Care is just a cutting edge resource and really doing some amazing things in the area of memory impairment and caring for loved ones with memory care. And I'm going to drop their website into chat there. And Ruby, you bring up another thing is that all of our loved ones are a little bit different, and so you know better what will trigger a loved one to make a decision or to sort of think outside the box on the way they were thinking if they're resistant. And it sounds like Ruby, that your husband's doctor told him that he needs to go someplace. And for a lot of folks, if somebody in a white coat tells you to do something, you're going to do it, especially if you've got a trusted connection with them. And so that's one of the things to think about if you are in challenging communication situations with your loved ones, is maybe make a list of the people in their lives that they really listen to, they who are influential. And it might be a former coworker that your loved one has not talked to for a few years, that they really admired the way that they were talking, and maybe bringing them into the dialogue on what your loved ones care. And so I've been talking about it here kind of at length, but it's number 5 on my list is try to get creative. Is really I think there's no prescription that fits all of us when it comes to this world of elder care. And the more creative that we can get, the better. And I'll share a caregiving story that has helped a lot of people over the years, and it relates to a parent helping an adult child who felt that mom was not safe at home anymore. But mom, like many of us, was sort of never imagined that they would be living in a senior living community. This is probably one of the most common discussions that I have with adult children and with older adults that are concerned about their safety and health at home. And so mom was this adult child took mom to tour 3 or 4 places, and she got the same answer at all 3 places. There's no way that I'm gonna go to any of these places. And now I was having a conversation with this adult child, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about your mom. And she said, well, mom was a college professor. And I was like, oh, what did she teach in college? And it's like, she taught theater. And then she said, and that's actually one of the things that she always uses is that when we go to the place, she always says, I'm not going to move here. I'm a college professor. And so I said to the adult daughter, I said, try this. Call those 3 places that you toured mom, and let them know that mom was a college professor in theater arts. And is there a way that they could outreach to the local high school or to a theater program and somehow integrate mom into utilize mom's skills as being a theater arts professor. And on one of the 3 communities actually was already doing that they had the high school kids would come over and they would rehearse their lines in front of the residents for the school play. And so then she said to her mom, she said, Mom, you know, this community found out that you were a theater arts professor and they really want you to come help them out with the high school theater program that comes there. And mom was excited about that. And she went to one of their rehearsals and immediately was ready to move in. And the adult child told me after all this happened, she said, you know, what it did was it gave her, there was this clearly defined thing that she wasn't getting by living at home that she could get at that community. And it was this purposeful activity of utilizing something that she was good at and that she loved. And that was a great story. So I'm just sort of sharing that that personal story there. Hope it helps with you. Okay, Jose says, there exist other ways to communicate other than logic and reasoning. The brain can share emotions without words. That's great. Let's see, Kristen says, I have some suggestions for caregivers that I recently got from a friend. Is chat the best way to share that? Is there another way to share that? Actually, Kristen, let me open up your mic. Oh, and I see that, let me open up your mic there. Hold on. And I see Jose's got his hand raised, but Jose, let me have Kristen share some of her tips, and then I will get to you next, Jose, and let me stop sharing my screen there. So Kristen, let's see. I think your mic's open.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks for jumping in. And for those of you who were expecting a discussion with Confessions of an Imperfect Caregiver, our author had the flu and really tried to take it down to the wire, but unfortunately couldn't make that. So we're just having an open discussion on caregiving. So Kristen, share some of the tips and suggestions you have.
Okay. I just typed this all up, and it's kind of a lot. So I'll try to summarize it, but I actually wrote this up for a group. I'm running a little solo aging group for friends. And one of those people has been a home health aide for years. And he's now retired, but he's supporting friends who are dying. And some of them are getting hospice care. So he strongly recommends the book, Making Friends with Death. He said every time before he goes to work with somebody, he reads the last third of the book because it gets him into a wonderfully meditative kind of state of mind. And do you want me to put that in the chat?
Oh, no, I got it.
Okay.
I just looked up the book, and I'm gonna shoot
Okay.
the link, and here I'll even put it up on the screen here from Amazon. Making Friends with Death: A Buddhist Guide to Encountering Mortality.
Right.
The one?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So this is all based on his own experience, but what he's going to talk with me further, but what he was sharing the other night was how to deal with the caregivers that are coming in, the professional caregivers, because it can be a challenge. And also his friend is a bit of a challenge because she doesn't want him telling her what to do. So it gets a little complicated. So here's what he suggests. He said, first, you really need to clear your own inner chatter and listen to the patient. Just as Jose was saying, listen to your own body, because you can often, sense intuitively what the patient needs through your own body. So make your body comfortable. The more comfortable you are, the better. You really need to be balanced physically, mentally, and emotionally. And he did have one situation where he went in and he wanted to wake up the woman because she had asked him to come to visit her. And he said, most dying people are sleeping almost all the time. And the aide did not want him to wake her up, but he knew that she wanted to talk. So he said, in some cases, you have to do what you feel is intuitively right. And also many patients crave conversation because they don't get that from professionals. And if you're a solo dying person, that can be a real challenge not to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and oftentimes, I mean, somebody somebody is sleeping because they don't have anybody to talk to. They're not feeling well. It's
Right.
But wow, these are great discussions. And I tell you one thing. Also, when you connect with your friend, one thing that I really want to do this year more than we have is to put real life stories on the pedestal on these discussions. And it certainly, the invitation is open to you and your friend to come on to a discussion and talk about, this personal caregiving challenge. I think that would be really very interesting and a great thing to build a dialogue around.
Yeah, he's really a wealth of information. It's difficult. I mean, he's so busy right now, and it's difficult for him to kind of organize all this information. So I said, we'll just have a conversation and I'll write it down. I'm happy to do that. So that's what I've been doing for the group. But yeah, it would be, I'll talk to him about it and see if he's interested. Some other things that he recommends. He said the most stressful part of working with professional caregivers, it's the aides. The nurses tend to be a little better. The social workers, he finds, are better. But the aides have crummy jobs. I recently had to be in rehab for weeks, and it's not a fun job, and they don't make much money. And also, they're very defensive because they're afraid that you might tell on them. If you might contact their boss and say she's not doing her job. So there are a lot of issues. So you have to be really careful with the aides in speaking with them and not coming across too aggressively. On the other hand, you really need to be a strong advocate. And this keeps coming up over and over and over. We know the healthcare system is broken, dealing with hospitals, dealing with nursing homes, everybody. Somebody has to be there to watch what's going on, because people are not doing their jobs. And it's not, I certainly feel great empathy for the work that they do, because everybody's overworked and understaffed. Anyway, he's found that, for example, the nurse would promise to get a hospital bed, bring mouth sponges, bring spittoons, and then he never, it takes weeks and weeks before he sees anything. So you have to stay on top of things. And also things like checking expired medications, that kind of stuff. The schedule of the medications, are people being given them at the right time? So that's just, some of the things that he mentioned the other night, and I will be getting more from him.
Well, I'll tell you, you bring up topics that we know are very real. In fact, I'm dropping into chat. We had last week a discussion on nursing home abuse and neglect, and some of it's interesting. The attorney that was speaking was talking about like if your loved one is in a facility or a community, understanding the chain of command and what motivates each level worker at that various level that you're asking for some help. You know, and these are some great suggestions that we all need to be aware of. But I tell you, you'd mentioned that this is as part of a solo aging group that you're running, support group. I think for those of us, you know, all of us are at risk of outliving our loved ones and being in a solo aging vulnerable position. But talking about these topics now will hopefully help us all sort of think about, you know, our own future and how we can help ourselves.
Right. Yeah, it's been interesting because when I first started the group, I mentioned it to a couple of friends who have spouses or children, and some of the people in the group do have both, but it's interesting to see how over time, one person in particular recently said to me she wanted to join the group. I said, well, we're closed at this point, but she said she began to realize she's probably going to outlive her husband. And what am I going to do?
No, and that's why I like the discussions on the topic of solo aging, because it's very hard for us to sit down and plan, to think that someday I might need to go to a nursing home. So what do I do? But it's a lot easier for us to think about, okay, if I outlive my spouse and I don't want to be a burden on my kids, what are the steps that I can take to make my care the best it can possibly be?
Right.
Well, Kristen, this has been great. Thanks for jumping in on this this wacky day where we don't have a set speaker, but I think the insights that you shared are fantastic, and please be in touch, and would love to feature you and your friend around a discussion topic and learn what y'all did.
Sounds great.
All right, so let's see. Jose has got his hand raised, and Jose is Jose. How's it going? I haven't talked to you in a while.
Steve, I just got back from Japan where I gave a talk, and I thought a little piece of that talk might be a gift to your audience, and I could share it because the nature of the talk was the stress of caregiving, and what we were centering on was the realization that so much of the stress comes from trying to bring the perception of the elder person and the caregiver into alignment, into a common communication channel. And what I was trying to help them understand with that was that the communication channel that you're striving to bring an elder into is one of time and memory that has only existed in humanity for 40,000 years. That most of the organisms on this planet do not understand time and memory. Most of the organisms on the planet live by instinct. And by living with instinct, what you begin to understand is that evolution has made of the human mind a conceit of time, and we value it as if it is the only way you can communicate. However, if you step back and you think of things like Buddhism, that Kristen was just mentioning, meditation, music, all of those are pathways to the brain's ability to communicate that do not depend on memory and time. And the reason I bring that out is because if you're a caregiver, your frustration and the pain that you are enduring comes from this insistence in trying to reconcile communication on a mode that has only come about in humanity, in human existence for the last 40,000 years. That if you were to learn how to communicate out of that mode in a way that can express emotions, because remember, even though if you have Alzheimer's and it ravages your cerebral cortex, the part of the brain that deals with emotions, the amygdala, remains intact. And so you can actually have communications of deep love and affection with a kid, with a loved one, that have nothing to do with memory and time. And the more you learn how to do that as a caregiver, more moments you will have that are memorable, that are pleasing, that avoid the burnout. But we don't know how to do that because we live in a culture, in today's modern Western culture, that emphasizes time and memory and productivity, you see. And so we become prisoners of our own desire to fulfill an ego state of communication, which is really not the main way animals have communicated for millions of years.
Yeah.
So what we tried to do, and what I was doing with them in Japan, was we have an utterance device that helps people understand how to learn to unlock those modes of communication, which are away from the egocentricity and the logic and the time and the memory, so that you can engage with your loved ones in a more harmonious manner. And
Man,
so I thought I'd just share that with you because I see in the audience a lot of stress and people trying to live up to the expectations of our modern Western world. And what really you have to do is just abandon that and
yeah.
learn to communicate away from that.
Well, Jose, I know we tried to get you on here to talk about the utterance device, but shoot me an email because I think this is a great topic too. It really does make a lot of sense. When you first said something, when you first started talking about that, I was thinking about my dog, and my dog, yes, you know, dog has memory. They know who you are and this, that, and the other. But like when you leave a house, your dog doesn't realize if you're gone 15 minutes or 5 hours. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, I don't know if that's an ideal comparison, but it popped into my mind. And I think a lot of our frustration is that we remember how our loved one behaved 20 years ago, and he's not behaving this way now.
Well, it's a good analogy that you can have an emotional relationship with a pet that can be totally fulfilling. In fact, people die and they leave their wealth to their pets because they've had such an intense relationship with them. So if we can do that with animals, why can't we learn to cultivate that with our loved ones? And I think that is simply a message of saying you can reduce the stress that unfortunately we are all headed for, and learn to be happier for this relationship that you're going to have to embark on.
Man, these are some great thoughts, Jose. Thanks so much, and do reach out because I'd love for you to share more of this and some of the other projects that you're involved with.
Well, okay.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Barbara typed in, she said, can you share things that you have heard from caregivers and families dealing with the transition from mid to late stage Alzheimer's, that wondering how their decline will go, how fast or how slow? My mother is being cared for at my sister's house by her and her family. I find an increasing anxiety for me at this point on how to prepare. My mom is not bedridden. Well, Barbara, I hope that some of the suggestions and thoughts that Jose and Kristen shared were helpful to you. I also would highly recommend reaching out to the Alzheimer's Association and trying to get into a support group, whether it be virtual or a in-person support group, and talk to as many people that have gone on this journey. Everybody's journey in life, and especially going through Alzheimer's and dementia, is different, but that I know that there's some resources there that can help you prepare a little bit for what the expectations might be as you transition from early to mid to late stage Alzheimer's, and how fast that occurs. We many times, none of us have a crystal ball, but I know that Alzheimer's Association does have some very good documentation on what the expectations could be at those various stages. I cut and pasted your question into chat there, just in case anybody else wanted to share some insights that they may have had. But let's see. Wow. I truly did not expect us to go a whole hour here today. I figured, okay, our presenter is not around, so I'll share 5 ideas on caregiving, and then we'll talk for 15 minutes. But I see that we're getting close to the end of the hour. I see that we retained most of our audience here, which is I'm pleasantly surprised. I think that sometimes this is a great format, just to sort of throw some ideas out there and riff on them. And so feel free, folks, to email me if you've got ideas or suggestions, or if you like this format. This could be something that maybe we do a couple of times a month, where we just talk about stuff as opposed to having a presenter on. But with that, I think I'm gonna wrap things up here. But okay, Patty says sometimes the decline also depends on what other medical conditions someone is living with. Yeah, so Barbara, be very aware of that. The other conditions, whether it be, you said your mom is not bedridden, but there might be other conditions, Parkinson's, low vision, hearing, things like that could really impact the direction of their progression through the cognitive impairment. Okay, well, folks, again, and then Barbara says, do you anticipate rescheduling today's speaker? Absolutely. I had, we had scheduled Bobbi many months ago, and but obviously, if she's in the middle of the flu, now's not the time to pick that date. I will follow up with her in a week or so, when hopefully she's better. We'll get her back on the calendar. And I love having discussions with authors who have written on any of the topics we talk about, because they've thought so deeply on that specific topic to write their book. And yeah, tomorrow's topic, I know it's totally different, but we're going to talk about sex after 60 and sexually transmitted diseases. And so this author knows a lot about that, and because she's done a lot of research in that area. So I'll get Bobbi back on. And thanks, Barbara, that my Plan B approach is met your approval. I certainly enjoyed it. I love talking about these topics, whether it be in a forum like this or one-on-one. And so for those that are hanging in there for this discussion, feel free to reach out, schedule time on my calendar. I love brainstorming. It's where I get a lot of ideas for these types of discussions. It's where I learn about blind spots, where things that, where we're not addressing the needs of our elders, and it can help us, move the needle here and make the world a better place for all of us. So all right, folks. Well, hopefully I'll see a few of you tomorrow and the next day at our discussions, and next week at our big solo aging discussion that we're going to have. And I thank you for hanging in there, and we'll talk to you all soon.